So let me tell you a story. We open on the morning of the reaping, 24 years after Haymitch has been crowned the victor of the second quarter quell, the 50th annual Hunger Games. It's his 40th birthday. We don't open with him though. We open with Katniss Everdeen, who will come to be known as the Girl on Fire. The book starts with Katniss in the woods. She's explaining to us why she feels comfortable there, and that's because her father taught her how to be comfortable there. Sort of. Katniss is mulling over the reaping, wherein the Capitol draws 2 names from a bowl, selecting 2 tributes as sacrifices to participate in the Hunger Games. This year is the 74th annual Hunger Games. Katniss tells us that her father died when she was 11 years old in a mining accident, and there's actually a lot of speculation, given what we know about Sunrise. Haymitch's father's mining accident, and the mining accident we hear about in Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes, were both not accidents. One of them we know for sure, the other speculative. This calls into question whether or not Katniss's father was maybe a rebel himself. 5 years later, I still wake up screaming for him to run. Katniss Everdeen has a weapon. She has a bow and arrow. This is very unusual, and actually is something that would be punishable by death in District 12. The people of District 12 are imprisoned inside of their small community. She tells us that her bow has been crafted by her father, and he could have made good money selling bows, but he didn't. He would have been publicly executed for inciting a rebellion. So Katniss explains that her mom has been ultimately ineffective and absent since her father died when she was 11 years old. Katniss has served as the provider and protector of her family since then. If she did not step into this role, her mother, and her little sister Prim would have died. She tells us that she's comfortable in the woods because her father taught her a little bit about them before he died. How apt that we're greeted by so many bird friends this morning. The people of District 12 have been taught to fear the woods in a pretty extreme way. Not only are there very legitimate predators that prowl along the edge of the fence because there aren't usually humans out there, but being out there, and particularly hunting out there and coming home with food, would count as poaching, and thus you are stealing from the Capitol. So while she's in the woods, she's greeted by one of her only 2 friends, Gale Hawthorne. He's 2 years older than her, and probably extremely attractive. It's Gale's final year of reaping eligibility. So Gale's 18 years old, and Katniss is 16. He is apparently extremely handsome, but Katniss tells us she hasn't noticed much. Okay? In human beings, there is a difference between being able to tell when someone is attractive, objectively or conventionally attractive, and when you are attracted to someone. And thus far, Katniss has never felt that she shares with us an inkling of attraction to Gale. What Gale has represented is a teacher, a mentor, a coach, a best friend, an older brother, but not a partner. Gale is very politically active. He can imagine a different future than the one that him and Katniss are currently absorbed in. In fact, Katniss says that sometimes when they're in the woods, he will rage against the Capitol and about the Capitol and about their oppression and their suffering. He understands and believes that things could be different. When you read The Hunger Games, the first book that was published in the series, after reading Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes and Sunrise on the Reaping, you're going to find Katniss to be a very different protagonist. She doesn't believe in a different future, and she's not particularly pressed about the oppression that she's suffering under. Her sole focus is survival, and she's managing. Don't get it twisted though. Regardless of the fact that both Katniss and Gale hunt daily and are relatively successful and own weapons in a district where almost no one does, there are still nights when game has to be swapped for lard or shoelaces or wool. Still nights when we go to bed with our stomachs growling. I never want to have kids, I say. I might, if I didn't live here, says Gale. But you do, I say, irritated. Forget it. He snaps back. Gale believes in something different. He believes in something more, and he even pitches to Katniss on the morning of the reaping that perhaps they could run away together and maybe they'd make it. Katniss can't see this as a likely possibility though, because she says, what about all the kids between us? Her and Gale are both parentified in their homes. They're both responsible for feeding children that are not theirs. So between Gale, Katniss, Prim, Posey, and you may as well throw in our mothers too, because how would they live without us? Who would fill those mouths that are always asking for more? At 16 years old, Katniss has more responsibility than most adults ever do with their lives. This is when we can dive in a little bit to Katniss's relationship with her mother. Like most parentified children, Katniss has no interest in trusting her mother. When she was 11 years old, her mom fell into a deep depression. One of the ways that she phrases it is that when her father died, her mom died too. 2 hearts beating as one. Once in a while, she'd stir, get up as if moved by some urgent purpose, only to then collapse back into stillness. Katniss begged her mother for help. She had no way of acquiring food and desperately feared being sent to some sort of foster home or orphanage. So she takes up the responsibilities of the household. Now, her mother has healed a little bit more, but Katniss still can't accept her help, even though she has come to a point where her mother is offering it. And that's because, like most parentified children, she believes that accepting help might eventually translate to relying on that help, and then, when, inevitably, that same parent lets you down again, you'll have no one but yourself to blame for the fact that you were not prepared. So Katniss can't trust anyone. Despite that fact, though, she lets her mom help her with her hair and even choose her dress on the morning of the reaping. This is something that Katniss is working on. The way that Katniss talks about her relationship with her mom is the way that the parent talks about their relationship with their child. She even shares with us that once it became relatively usual for Katniss to be putting food on the table, her mother told her that I always eat like I'll never see food again. And I said, I won't unless I bring it home. And that shut her up. We learn that Katniss's birthday is May 8th, which means she's a Taurus. I'm going to be making the case that Katniss is a person with autism. She's autistic. And I have a few pieces of evidence for this, and I'm going to trace it for you line by line, just so you can keep with me, right? So one of the criteria for autism is deficits in social emotional reciprocity, meaning deficits in developing, maintaining, understanding relationships, the absence of interest in peers. Katniss has no social emotional awareness. She is terrible at reading social cues, and I'm going to keep giving you evidence for that throughout the rest of the books. And she has ultimately no interest in peers. This is maybe a survival mechanism, right? Because all she's doing is trying to put food on the table for her and her sister, but she's not interested in friendship. While they're leaving the woods, Katniss and Gale end up sort of like selling off their spoils, trading the things that Katniss was able to shoot and kill, and the rabbits or squirrels that get caught in Gale's snares. They end up stopping at the mayor's house, Mage's house. Mage and Katniss are best friends, but she has no idea. Deficits in developing, maintaining, understanding relationships. Since neither of us really has a group of friends, we seem to end up together a lot at school. We rarely talk, which suits us both just fine. We get this interesting conversation that I do think is a callback to the Maisley Donner of the situation. Gale comments on Mage's dress. There's maybe some implied feelings here, like maybe Mage has a crush on Gale, we don't know. And Mage says, well, if I end up going to the Capitol, I want to look nice, don't I? Sarcasm. And Gale gets real pissed and he says, you won't be going to the Capitol. His eyes land on a small circular pin that adorns her dress. Real gold. Beautifully crafted. And I understand why Gale says this, right? Because he's saying, you don't have any tesserae. Your name is entered in there the mandate number of times, and that's it. Gale's name is in there 42 times. He's looking at her like, you and your privilege don't have anything to fear. But Mage knows that she does. Mage is the daughter of Marilee Donner, Maisley Donner's twin sister. So Maisley Donner would have been Mage's aunt. This just goes to show that you can't really judge anyone. You don't really know. This brings us to the reaping. You become eligible for the reaping the day you turn 12. That year, your name is entered once, at 13, twice, so on and so forth. Katniss tells us that, like Haymitch and like Gale, she has had to take out tesserae. What tesserae gets you is 1 can of tinned oil and 1 sack of flour once a month. Since she turned 12 years old. You can take out tesserae for each member of your family. Every year, she has had to do this in order to make sure that they survive. She's not the only child in District 12 that has to do this. Gale has to do this too, and he has more family members, so his name will be entered more times. It has a compounding effect. Katniss tells us the entries are cumulative. So now, at the age of 16, my name will be in the reaping 20 times. Gale, who is 18 and has been either helping or single-handedly feeding a family of 5 for 7 years, will have his name entered 42 times. So the odds are in neither of their favor. Katniss has the wherewithal to recognize that this is just another way that the Capitol works to plant seeds of hatred between the starving workers of the seam and those who can generally count on supper or townfolk. The Capitol understands that if it can sow discord between the people of the districts, it can maintain power over them, because they'll never unify. So let's talk about the reaping. Many of us agree that this reaping was rigged, and the reason that we think that is because every other reaping that we've had insight to has been. Lucy Gray's was rigged. She was chosen by the mayor because Mayfair wanted to date her ex-boyfriend. That's fucking crazy. That's nuts. That is so drama. Like, come on. We know Ampert, BT's son, in the second quarter quell, was rigged. He was chosen specifically because BT had been caught inside of a rebel plot that same year. We know Haymitch was illegally reaped. His name was never drawn from the bowl, but he had to go anyway. And it's also possible that Maisley Donner, right, because of that moment with the locket between her and Haymitch, we believe that perhaps her grandmother was Covey, which would make Maisley Covey. And obviously, the third quarter quell, which will happen next year, will also be rigged. Collins herself, through Katniss, speculates at the probability that Prim's name could have been chosen from the bowl. Katniss says she's about as safe as you can get since she's only entered once. She says, I protect Prim in every single way that I can, but I'm powerless against the reaping, and that will prove to not be true. So, in part 1 of the timeline, I posed the theory that perhaps Snow rigged the reaping specifically to try to draw Katniss into the Hunger Games. We had a lot of opinions on this. The reason that I think that this is possible is because we know that Snow had access to the woods in the lake that Katniss believes herself to be unsurveilled and unperceived in. We know that he has specifically been there, and he knows that rebels tend to congregate there. We know that he is surveilling those same woods because that's how he comes to find out that Gale and Katniss have shared a kiss in catching fire. Not only is Katniss proving herself very proficient with a weapon, they say very treasonous and traitorous things that would be punishable by execution if said inside of the fence. Katniss is beloved by the district, okay? She is completely unaware of this. More evidence of autism. She can find any excuse to explain away why the people are treating her the way that they are. Deficits in social emotional reciprocity. But she is clearly a pillar of her community. Anyway, so a lot of us buy that it was rigged, we just don't know why. This theory was posed to me, and I did a bunch of research on it because I think it's so cool and I'd never heard it before. Perhaps Primrose's name was chosen because Snow thought she was Covey. There are 2 poems that she could potentially be named after that both seem to have themes that Suzanne Collins may have gravitated towards. I know that Katniss says that Prim's face is as fresh as a raindrop, as lovely as the primrose for which she was named. Her name doesn't actually legitimately have to be Covey for Snow to have thought that she was. And if Burdock Everdeen is related to Lenore Dove, who is Covey, that means that Katniss Everdeen is somehow related to Lucy Gray, who was also Covey, which would mean Primrose was too. Perhaps Snow has access to the hidden link, the link that we don't yet have, between Burdock, Lenore Dove, Lucy Gray, and Katniss. I just think it's a really cool theory. I just think it's a cool theory as to why Prim's name might have been pulled out of the bowl. Katniss notes Haymitch's absence at the reaping, and he arrives late, and then he tries to give Effie a big hug. And we know why he's trying to give Effie a big hug, because Effie has virtually been his only relationship since he was 16 years old. She's the only familiar face that he engages in any sort of communication with in his adult life. Katniss actually describes what Haymitch does to Effie as like a molestation. Pretty aggressive. We all know what happens next. Effie pulls Prim's name out of the bowl, and Katniss immediately volunteers. She tells us that in District 12, the word tribute is pretty much synonymous with the word corpse. Volunteers are all but extinct. In a chilling scene, she volunteers and she pushes Prim behind her. Prim won't let go. Gale has to come and forcibly remove Prim from Katniss. She's thrashing in his arms. Once Katniss has finally mounted the stage, she says, to the everlasting credit of the people of District 12, not a single person claps. Possibly because they know me from the Hob, or knew my father, or have encountered Prim, who no one can help but love. At least, I don't expect it, because I don't think of District 12 as a place that cares about me. The reason that Katniss believes the people of District 12 don't much care for her is because she remembers that they all almost watched her die when she was a child. When she was 11, before she found the courage or the strength or the insight to go into the woods, she was trying to trade anything in their home for food. Her, Prim, and her mother were starving to death. And so she went around town trying to trade Prim's old baby clothes. And she's walking through the rain, and it's the winter, and she's very, very cold and so small, but nobody helped. So this is why she thinks that they don't care about her. She can't forgive them. Could you? So not a single person claps when Katniss is up on that stage. The people of the districts are expected to celebrate the Hunger Games like they are a festival. This is a piece of the humiliation that the Capitol is trying to force upon them. It exacerbates their suffering quite greatly. Not a single person clapping is also rebellious. So yes, Katniss chooses her own fate, but the people of the districts already see her as something more than the girl that she is. Katniss describes this as the boldest form of dissent that they're capable of taking part in. Katniss is representing something in this moment. She has already become a symbol without any grander plan. She's evoking something in people without intending to do so. Katniss gives us some insight into her tendency to mask. She has learned to hide her emotions and to swallow her feelings and to keep her mouth shut because the things that she naturally or organically wants to express or say could get her executed. So I learned to hold my tongue and turn my features into an indifferent mask so that no one could ever read my thoughts. Literally the word mask. Haymitch actually protects Katniss on the stage. She's trying not to lose it as the district salutes her, and the way that she describes Haymitch is not ultimately who he is. We know that because we've had insight into his brain in Sunrise on the Reaping, and Collins gives us little clues. She's trying not to cry, and Haymitch maybe intuits this. He makes a spectacle of himself. He throws his arm around Katniss and ends up head diving off the stage. She says he's disgusting, but I'm grateful. Not only has Haymitch been aware of Katniss since she was born, and maybe even loved Katniss since she was born. I first saw the girl at the Hob when she was just a baby. Tough and smart, her hair in 2 braids then. Reminding me for all the world of Luella McCoy, my sweetheart of old. But Burdock Everdeen, Katniss's dad, was Haymitch's best friend. And he's had no friends since. He actually, in a callback, says, I like this one. Lots of... He can't think of a word for a while. Spunk. This brings us to the light of my life, Peeta Mellark, the son of a baker, which makes him a town boy. So his being drawn in the reaping is also kind of surprising, reminiscent of Maisie Donner. Katniss is pretty disturbed that Peeta Mellark has been chosen because how the heck is she supposed to kill the boy with the bread? Peeta sees a young Katniss, dejected, in the mud, in the freezing rain, and intentionally burns a loaf of bread so that he can give it to her. His mother was yelling, feed it to the pig, you stupid creature. Why not? No one decent will buy burned bread. It didn't occur to me until the next morning that the boy might have burned the bread on purpose, knowing it meant being punished, and then delivered them to me. But I dismiss this. To this day, I can never shake the connection between this boy, Peeta Mellark, and the bread that gave me hope, and the dandelion that reminded me that I am not doomed. It was after Peeta gave her that bread that she remembered the woods, that she remembered the pantry that exists inside the woods. She remembered the wisdom that her father had shared with her before his death. So she says that forever, her survival and Peeta's have always been linked. Collins has gone out of her way to swap the traditional gender norms of our 2 characters. Peeta is literally in the kitchen, okay? He is always feeding her. He's a literal baker. He frosts the cakes. This is not like a super masculine, it's not our traditional definition of masculine. Peeta is regarded as highly observant, kind, compassionate, friendly, gentle, emotionally intuitive. He's extremely articulate. He's self-sacrificing. These are all traits that we typically assign to women and that we see represented in our female characters. And he doesn't consider himself a contender in the games at any point in time. Katniss, on the other hand, is the literal muscle of the situation. She's brash, impulsive, aggressive at times. It's actually spelled out for us toward the end of the book. She's literally the hunter and him the gatherer. She thinks she owes him because she never thanked him for the bread. In fact, even though they've been to school together, they've never spoken. They make eye contact occasionally, but it's always very charged and fleeting. Exactly how am I supposed to work in a thank you in there? Somehow it just won't seem sincere if I'm trying to slit his throat. Odds are someone else will kill him before I do. Of course, the odds have not been very dependable of late. This is more proof that the reaping was rigged, because the Gamemakers routinely inside of the games conspire to manipulate the arena. They try to force an interaction between Katniss and the careers, literally flinging fireballs at her. The Gamemakers explicitly manipulate the odds so that Katniss will have to kill Peeta, or vice versa. None of this is about odds. After tributes are reaped, they are taken to the Justice Building where they get to say goodbye to their family. Okay. Katniss's family visits her. Katniss gives them instructions on how to stay alive. She tells them what they must remember to do that she won't be there to do anymore. She tells them that Gale and her had made a deal about a year ago that if one of them were to be reaped, they'd take care of the other's family. This is an enormous responsibility because we know that as it is, with 2 of them hunting, it's not enough to consistently keep both of their families fed. He probably won't ask for compensation, but you should make sure you have something to give him anyway. You should thank him with some kind of trade, like milk or medicine. Then she addresses her mother. You can't leave again. It's very important to her that she doesn't die in vain, and that means her mother has to fill the mother shoes that Katniss has been filling for Prim for the last 5 years. Katniss promises Prim that she will try to win, but even then, she doesn't really buy that it's a likely possibility because, of course, District 12 has only had Haymitch as their one winner, and of course Lucy Gray, but Katniss doesn't know about Lucy Gray. It's not in Katniss's nature to go down without a fight, even when things seem insurmountable. After her family leaves, Peeta's dad visits Katniss. He brings her some cookies, which, is a luxury that Katniss could never afford. And he doesn't say anything. The 2 of them just sit there. Before he leaves, he says he'll look out for Prim, make sure she's eating. More proof of Katniss's lack of social awareness. She says people deal with me, but they are genuinely fond of Prim. She thinks that Prim is lovable in a way that she is not. She does not understand herself to be a girl that has survived insurmountable odds thus far already. Then her best friend, Mage visits Katniss, and Katniss is so surprised by this. She's like, oh, I thought we just hung out all the time and ate every meal together and did all of our school projects together. Mage gives Katniss the Mockingjay pin and asks her to please wear it. Obviously, this was previously Maisley's pin, and it was crafted by Tan Amber, so it has a lot of history and implication inside of it. This is another way that Katniss has been manipulated or moved into being a face for something that she's not aware of at all. I'm left thinking that maybe Mage really has been my friend all along. You think? Then, of course, after Mage leaves, Gale comes in, and he tells her that this is just hunting, that she can win. He says, you're the best hunter I know. She says, I don't know how to kill people. And he says, how different is it, really? This is foreshadowing for when Gale will eventually use his snare strategy that he uses for animals to bring down the peacekeeping mountain of District 2. Katniss and Peeta are carted from the train. It's her first time ever in an automobile, and she says that she masks her face to appear almost bored, to reduce sharing of interests, emotions, or affect. But Peeta, on the other hand, has clearly been crying. He's very comfortable expressing emotion. Katniss is contemplating the pin that Mage has given her, and she's thinking about what a Mockingjay might symbolize. They're funny birds and something of a slap in the face to the Capitol, but she also feels like it's like having a piece of her father with her, protecting her. Her father used to sing, and the Mockingjays would sing too. Effie has maybe gotten worse with age. She still fully believes the Capitol's shit. She says a lot of offensive things in this book. For starters, she praises Peeta and Katniss on their manners. She says the pair last year ate everything with their hands like a couple of savages. It completely upset my digestion. Katniss tells us that the pair last year were two kids from the seam who'd never, not one day of their lives, had enough to eat. Haymitch is belligerent and drunk on the train. Maybe this is his regular Reaping Day behavior. It might also have to do with the fact that Katniss is on this train, this child that he loves, and maybe feels more responsibility to protect than any of the other tributes. Peeta volunteers to take care of Haymitch, and Katniss wonders what his strategy is there, but then thinks, well, maybe he's just being kind, just as he was kind to give me the bread. More evidence of the reverse gender role, Peeta as the literal caretaker, and also, like, more understanding for Haymitch, because we understand that, one, this is a defense mechanism. Alcohol is offering some sort of numbness so that he doesn't have to confront the reality of the situation, but also because he literally can't act to save any of the tributes that it's his job to save, right? The situation with the milk and Welly all over again. If he tries to help the tributes that are in his charge, he believes that they will be targeted by the Capitol and President Snow. If he doesn't try to help them, one, they're on their own and probably won't survive anyway, and he'll look like a district traitor. He will be a district traitor. So Haymitch has been stuck in this horrific manipulation, coercion situation for his entire life. The next day, Haymitch and Peeta get into an altercation, and Haymitch punches Peeta in the face on the train, which just brings me back to the moment with Maisley and Drusilla. He says sort of something along the lines of, like, I've done you a favor, the audience will think you mixed it up with another tribute, then they'll think you're tough. I don't know. Eventually, they convince Haymitch to help them. And he says, okay, don't interfere with my drinking, and I'll stay sober enough to help you. The first piece of advice that Haymitch gives Katniss and Peeta is you must submit to whatever your prep team is about to do to you. That is... My adolescent mind protected me from a lot of this, but Katniss is routinely naked in front of adults. She is expected, required, to submit to a full body wax. I don't know if you've ever been waxed, okay? Strangers, waxing her entire adolescent body. She is regularly examined while she is naked. She is 16 years old. Not just the discomfort and the violation of being naked in front of a bunch of adults who do not consider you human. Excellent. You almost look like a human being now. That line is very reminiscent of, like, the paws and claws situation, prep team conversation that Haymitch has had with his prep team when he was 16. And Katniss actually thinks of her prep team as pets moving forward. So it's kind of an interesting flop. When she's been waxed and scrubbed and exfoliated, she wonders what kind of look her stylist is going to dress her in, and she hopes that her stylist won't think that nudity is the last word in fashion. This implies that previously a stylist has sent their child tribute out on that chariot naked. After she's clean and ready, prepared for her stylist, there is a scene where Cinna walks around her while she's naked, examining her. Our darling Cinna. As an adult, it is literally chilling and violating to read. And you can't help but think of child actors. It's also theorized that the games are a metaphor for the child acting industry, which I can totally see too. And obviously, there's more and more information coming out about what was going on some of our favorite television shows when we were children. And it is horrifying. But even more than that, more than what was happening behind closed doors, what happens in front of our faces experiences has been pretty horrific too. We also have confirmation that victors are almost immediately sold into sex slavery by their president at the behest of the Capitol. Obviously, this isn't a new concept, right? Powerful men paying for the privilege of Obviously, this isn't a new concept. This feels like something different than pedophilia. Pedophilia, we understand at present to be a mental illness that typically afflicts those that have been perped on themselves. I don't think this is that. I don't know how we move on from this. I don't know how we recover from this. Once Katniss and Peeta are dressed in their flaming costumes, it's Cinna that insists that they hold hands. This is also an act of rebellion that is not perpetuated by Katniss herself. This is Katniss being manipulated into being a symbol of something that she's wholly unaware of. Them holding hands is rebellious because, one, they're showing unity and a certain amount of district pride, and this is a competition where only one person can win. So it's them ultimately saying, we're not playing the way you want us to play. But again, that's not Katniss saying this. Katniss, when we compare her with Lucy Gray and Haymitch, is the only tribute that intends to play the game the way that the Capitol wants her to play. When Katniss is on the chariot, she's blowing kisses to the people in the crowd, and she says, everyone wants my kisses. The implications of this are terrifying, because we understand that her kisses literally would have been for sale. How many folks in the audience would have bought access to Katniss's kisses? And I wonder if the star-crossed lovers of it all has protected her from this fate. She looks at Peeta and says, for the first time I look at him and realize that ablaze with fake flames, he is dazzling. I'm of the school of thought that Katniss is attracted to Peeta, but is very unaware of this. Obviously, I'm also with Katniss. She doesn't have room to think about dating or who she has a crush on or attraction, right? Her survival has been consistently threatened and she is extremely traumatized. This is not at the forefront of her mind, and she never expects it to be because she never intends to marry. She's not going to have children. She doesn't intend to have children, and it doesn't seem that anyone in District 12 or the people of the districts have access to birth control, so she believes that she won't engage in any sort of romantic relationship at all, because it wouldn't be fair to the other person. And if she's autistic, she's not going to be awesome at emotion processing. She might even be attempting to think her feelings, which is what we see in a lot of the book. Been there. Also, Peeta has been obsessed with her for literally her entire life, and she's never noticed. She is not adept at reading and understanding emotional cues, but she does in this moment think of him as dazzling, which is not the way she's ever thought about Gale. She's like, I guess he's handsome. People seem to think so. He's pretty male. That's not the same thing as he's dazzling and lit by flames. And I'm glad now I have Peeta to clutch for balance. He is so steady, solid as a rock. When they get off the chariot and they haven't burned alive, Katniss is feeling a lot of relief and a sort of giddiness because she understands that she has made a splash, right? She really does believe that if she can get her hands on a bow and arrow, she might really be able to participate in the Hunger Games in the way that other tributes from District 12 have not been able to. So she gets off the chariot and Peeta says, you should wear flames more often. They suit you. And she says, it's so genuinely sweet with just the right touch of shyness that an unexpected warmth rushes through me. Well, obviously we haven't been with her for most of her relationship with Gale, but she likes him. She just can't discern that she likes him because she doesn't have the space for it, and she believes that he's pretending. Throughout the rest of this saga, she will grapple with her feelings for him because they exist. One, if she wonders if his action, his behavior, and what she's ultimately attracted to is just his attempt at manipulating her. She struggles with trust. She has trust issues, and of course, he is her competition. It would be stupid to trust him. I'm with Katniss. And she grapples with her feelings because she wonders if they're prescribed by the Capitol. Peeta, even though she may have chosen him, will always represent the Capitol's destined path for her. So she can never know what she really feels because she can't engage with her emotion processing. This brings us to the Tribute Center and the apartment inside of the Tribute Center. Katniss describes this as their home/prison until the games begin. And she tells us that whenever Cinna and Portia, the two stylists, are around, They seem to have a civilizing effect on Haymitch and Effie. At least they're addressing each other decently. This implies to me that something has gone on between the two of them over the course of the years. It seems unbelievable that Haymitch wouldn't have tried to decondition her of her capital brainwashing, but maybe it was ineffective. I don't know. Katniss, much like Haymitch, is being manipulated and orchestrated into representing something that she is wholly unaware of. At least Haymitch in his games was a little bit more consenting, right? Like he was brought in by BT and asked to participate. Katniss is never informed, and maybe this is a kindness to relieve her of some of the pressure. I don't know. Knowing what we know about Plutarch and that he's been involved with rebellious ideas and working toward rebellion for at least 24 years, does this mean that Cinna and Portia also are in on it, like from the beginning, that these costumes are designed to illuminate the tributes of District 12, to, fuel the flames of the spark that Haymitch himself lit with his flint striker? I don't know. I can kind of buy it, especially because Cinna will go on to design the costumes that Katniss wears throughout the rebellion. So I'm not trying to invalidate Katniss and all of her bravery and all of her courage. I just mean to say that she does seem to have been selected without full participation and consent. Of course, she volunteers for the games, but it is routinely brought up, not just by Katniss, but also by Haymitch, that the things that make her so powerful are the way that people are perceiving her. Cinna in the way that he's dressing her, making her the girl on fire. Mage, with the Mockingjay pin, literally prescribes her the Mockingjay title. And then, of course, Peeta declaring his love for her. None of these things are Katniss's orchestration. None of these things are her choices. She is forced to submit to them. So I'm just saying. Okay. Also, more proof. Peeta takes off his jacket and wraps it around my shoulders. A friend would do that, right? No. Peeta rolls his eyes at Haymitch. She has no idea the effect she can have. Is he suggesting that I got good deals because people pitied me? Besides, my game is first class. No one pitied me. I glower at the roll. Sure, he meant to insult me. Deficits in understanding relationships. She has no idea the effect she can have, obviously meant to demean me, right? But then she thinks, wait a second, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he meant I was appealing in some way. This conversation takes place while they're at dinner together. Peeta and Haymitch and Effie and Katniss have sort of become a team as it relates to their attempts to win the games in a way that previous District 12 tributes have not. Anger temporarily blocked out my nervousness, emotions that are all-encompassing, about meeting the other tributes, but now I can feel my anxiety rising again. When she does get a chance to examine the tributes without all of their costumes, she says that she might actually be in a better position than most other District 12 girls may have been, because her family's resourcefulness has led to her family's being more prosperous and thus her being better fed than a lot of the other tributes there. The exception, of course, are kids from wealthier districts, the volunteers, the ones who have been fed and trained throughout their lives for this moment. I think this is also meant to represent children in the acting industry, child stars, right? Calling attention to the kids that are sort of pushed by necessity into the acting industry by their parents versus thespian children. Some kids work so their parents can eat, their parents live off of them. Some kid actors are in it for the love of the craft. I think that's what that distinction is. I'm going to talk about the movies in a second, but they really do a disservice to Katniss and Peeta's relationship because it really does develop throughout the books. In training, Katniss is pretty mean to Peeta. He shares with her that he does the cakes, and she's like, that's lovely. If only you could frost someone to death. He can take it, right? Like, she'll dish it out and he can take it. He always responds with such gentleness and compassion and humor. He's so lovely. He says, don't be so superior. You can never tell what you'll find in the arena. Say it's actually a gigantic cake. She's not a mean person, but she's kind of an unfriendly person because she really has not forgiven her peers to absence of interest in peers or the people of her district. And she also believes that she's off-putting, right? Because she's not particularly friendly. She's kind of shy, actually. She becomes quite defensive around, like, popular kids. Like Peeta. Peeta's very popular. And she's relatively certain that he's trying to manipulate her with his humor and wit, and she's falling for it, right? She recognizes the feelings inside of her as real. And so she's like, get the fuck off. She's like trying to push him away. She says Peeta excels in hand-to-hand combat, and I sweep the edible plants test without blinking an eye. Foreshadowing. Haymitch and Effie have insisted that Peeta and Katniss maintain a camaraderie throughout all of training and all of the pre-games situations. Katniss is really frustrated by this because none of the other teams seem to be doing this. Her and Peeta are always dressed the same, and that's not normal for the other tributes. And she's like, this kind of sucks that we have to pretend to be friends because we are being pitted against one another. We are going to be asked to kill each other. During one of the days of training at lunch, her and Peeta are facilitating faux conversation. Peeta says, "All right, I'll keep smiling pleasantly and you talk." It's wearing us both out, Haymitch's direction to be friendly. Because, for neurotypical people, their brains reward them with dopamine when they engage in any sort of interaction, during any communication exchange. That's why neurotypical people are not only comfortable with small talk, but maybe even prefer it, because they get dopamine from it. It feels like communication to them, even though it's scripted. I am so confused by this. Even it's scripted, and you're not allowed to say the truth? I can't. All communication for neurodivergent people requires effort and energy, so we prefer not to perform without any sort of meaningful exchange. We like to engage with one another and interact with one another. We get dopamine from connection, not just surface level, I'll never get it. And neither does Katniss, and it's really wearing her out, particularly in a time when she has to be hyper-vigilant, she's examining her competition, she's awaiting her death. The horror of the situation just continues to expand, seemingly without end. Familiar? This is when we get an introduction to Rue. I'm going to talk more about her when we get there, but Rue is a small yellow flower that grows in the meadow. Rue, Primrose, neither of them could tip the scale at 70 pounds soaking wet. I do think the film adaptation of the book The Hunger Games leaves a lot to be desired. I can appreciate Catching Fire and the Mockingjay movies way more. They feel significantly more authentic. This first movie makes so many changes that feel legitimately unnecessary. One, obviously, the absence of mage. We know that Katniss's Mockingjay pin is made of solid gold, and she literally says in the book that that pin could keep her family in bread for weeks. So the idea that someone gives it to her for free the way that she does in the movie, it just doesn't make any sense. There's no reason to do that. And I also think that the movie distorts Katniss and Peeta's relationship in a way that it doesn't have to. And let's talk about the casting. The only person in the Hunger Games movie that is cast accurately is Rue, which is rich because a lot of the internet had a lot to say about this casting. Amandla Steinberg is exceptional and correct. She is exactly how Rue is described, which is magical and wispy and tiny and like a bird in flight. So she's most accurately cast. Peeta is supposed to have blue eyes, and I love Josh Hutcherson. Same thing. Haymitch is supposed to have dark curly hair, and I love Woody Harrelson. I really do. I loved Haymitch as a 12-year-old that was reading this book. I was very attracted to the broken, drunken man. I've got my own issues. I'm sorting them out. So I knew exactly what he was supposed to look like. And when Woody Harrelson showed up on the screen, I was like, Haymitch is supposed to be from the seam, and people from the seam have dark hair and gray eyes and olive skin. The erasure of race inside of this book is erasing a key component of it, right? Collins is trying to call attention to the discrimination that the people of the seam face. Town kids, who typically have blonde hair and blue eyes, are always more privileged and better off. This is a huge component of the book. Why did you erase it? Please. So the first movie I find quite literally cringe, and there's a lot of like explanatory narration. I understand why they're doing that because obviously we're not inside of Katniss's head, but it's just such a simplification of a very complex book, just like a stripped down version of the book, which I guess maybe all movies are. I don't know. It's the night before they're supposed to prepare for interviews, and Katniss is getting very, very confused about the performance and the pretending of it all, and so when her and Peeta are walking back to their respective rooms at night, she said, don't let's pretend when there's no one around. He says, all right, Katniss, tiredly. After that, we only talk in front of people. So this brings us to the end of training, when the Gamemakers are meant to assign each tribute a score that reflects their skill or likelihood of winning the games. This is to help inform betting. Katniss has the last time slot. So the Gamemakers, she says, have been there for way too long. They've sat through 23 other 15-minute demonstrations, which means the Gamemakers have been there for something like 8 hours. So they're not really paying any attention to her. She says, my heart starts to pound. I can feel my face burning. Without thinking, I pull an arrow from my quiver and send it straight at the Gamemakers' table. Of course, I wasn't shooting at the Gamemakers. I was shooting at the apple because I got so angry at being ignored. Katniss is fully encompassed by her emotion. She can have no thought but for the present moment and for justice in the present moment, and there is no consideration of the consequences. Does this sound like autism? Before she ends up shooting her apple at the Gamemakers, she does end up shooting around the arena. She actually shoots through a rope, foreshadowing, and then obviously shooting at the apple will foreshadow her eventual shot through the burlap sack that will trigger the explosion that blows up all the courier's supplies. After she dismisses herself, thank you for your consideration, she wonders if there will be consequences for her mother and Prim, and she becomes very, very scared in a way that she wasn't when she shot the arrow. Haymitch asks how it went, and he says, "And you, sweetheart?" Somehow, Haymitch calling me sweetheart ticks me off enough that I'm at least able to speak. She tells him what happened, and she wonders if her family will be punished or executed, or if she'll be executed, and he says, "Doubt it. It'd be a pain to replace you at this point," which, This girl is a hostage who has been starved, tortured, beaten, and cosmetically altered to look like Luella. Brings us back to the Lulu of it all. Effie actually says, well, it serves them right. It's their job to pay attention to you. And just because you come from District 12 is no excuse to ignore you. Then her eyes dart around as if she'd said something totally outrageous. I'm sorry, but that's what I think. Gives us some insight into a way that the capital citizens are also not free. Their speech and freedoms are also restricted. So the scores, the number, which is between 1 and 12, 1 being irredeemably bad and 12 being unattainably high, signifies the promise of a tribute. Peeta is given a score of 8, and Katniss is given a score of 11. This is ultimately unheard of. It's the highest score of any tribute given in this year's games. This is when Katniss starts to think about Gale and try to sort out her thoughts. She says she can't help comparing what she has with Gale to what she's pretending to have with Peeta. Gale and I were thrown together by a mutual need to survive, and Peeta and I know the other's survival means our own death. I think of Gale without me. Both of us can hunt alone, but we're better as a pair. The reason that they met is because she recognized his snares. She was trying to examine them, and he assumed that she was stealing food. He'd lost his father in the same blast that killed mine. She might be able to get him a bow if he had something to trade, not food. She didn't want food. What she wanted was knowledge, an ability to sustain herself. And then, one day, without either of us saying it, we became a team. Gale gave me a sense of security I'd lacked since my father's death. Gale is family. The next day, when Katniss wakes up, she finds out that Peeta has decided he wants to train alone. She's going to engage in interview training by herself. And she says what she feels first is betrayal. And that's ludicrous. For there to be betrayal, first there had to be trust. The first 4 hours of her training session are with Effie, and what do they cover? Once I finally conquer walking, they're still sitting, posture, and apparently I have a tendency to duck my head. Eye contact, hand gestures, and smiling, to abnormalities in eye contact and body language, or deficits in understanding and use of gestures. Then she moves into her training session with Haymitch, and that goes horribly. And I have to imagine it goes horribly because Haymitch is triggered for like 8 different reasons. He actually does tell Katniss that she's a dead slug. He says when you open your mouth, you come across as sullen and hostile. And this gets her thinking about how unjust all the games are. She's like, why do I have to fucking perform to beg you to sponsor me? And he's like, you have to share with them. You have to get them to like you. She says that she doesn't want to, or this feels like resistance. She's like, I don't want them to have any insight into who I am. They're stealing my future. I don't want them to have access to my past. And I also think one of the reasons that Haymitch finds Katniss so like unappealing, I think he's stumped by her because he's stumped by himself, right? Like he doesn't know how to make himself likable, and he sees so much of himself in Katniss. Also, he probably sees a lot of Burdock in Katniss, and that's probably hard for him to work around. And he also sees Luella McCoy inside of Katniss. So there's just a lot of things that could be getting in Haymitch's way as it relates to his helpfulness in this specific area. It's actually Cinna that is the most helpful in this area. He says, why don't you just be yourself? And Katniss confides in Cinna that Haymitch says she's sullen and hostile, and he called her a dead slug. And Cinna says, well, you are sullen and hostile. Around Haymitch, right? Neurodivergent people have a tendency to mask or mirror the people they're in front of. They actually tend to be in ultimately a different version of themselves, chameleoning based on who they're in front of. So Katniss, when she's talking to Cinna, is quite friendly. Katniss, when she's thinking about Rue or Prim, is very soft and compassionate. She's a different version of herself, which is why neurodivergent people tend to struggle in groups and social contexts, because they have no idea how to be or who to be, because they don't know who to mask to or mirror. So when we get to the interviews, Katniss tells us a little bit more about the people of the capital. She says they do surgery in the capital to make people appear younger and thinner. In District 12, looking old is something of an achievement, since so many people die early. She doesn't understand the capital's fixation with youth. It doesn't make any sense. Katniss, or Suzanne Collins, does a lot to try to make Caesar more empathetic as a character. I'm not buying it. Katniss tells us that he laughs at lame jokes and can turn a weak response into a memorable one by the way he reacts. She insists that, Caesar's trying to help the tributes. That doesn't resemble talk show hosts in real life as it relates to child actors. It's really easy to think of a lot of horrible and probing questions. The things that were said and done to these children on national TV is and obviously, right, like this puts so much power in Caesar's hands because it's contingent on his mood. I'm thinking about the panache of it all, right? Caesar decides who he likes, and then he ultimately has the power to control their narrative with the people of the capital and thus influence their betting. That's, I don't know. And Caesar even says, it's all right, she's safe with me, to the crowd, and I'm like, oh, please. Hamish has told her she needs to have a sort of aesthetic. She needs to strip herself down. Shrew, calculator, lunatic, rascal. And we get these lines regarding Glimmer. With that flowing blonde hair, emerald green eyes, her body tall and lush, she's sexy all the way. We're talking about a 16-year-old whose angle is sexiness. I don't think we know how old Glimmer is, actually. Then we get insight into Rue's interview. She says, I'm very hard to catch, and if they can't catch me, they can't kill me, so don't count me out. Then we get Katniss on stage. She does a good job. She's very nervous about her interview because Haymitch has told her basically that it's the end-all be-all of her games, and she sucks at it, but goes relatively well. She does feel that Caesar is helping her out a bit, and she gets help from the Gamemakers. In fact, Caesar asks her how she got that 11, and she looks up at the Gamemakers and says, I'm not supposed to talk about it, right? And the Gamemaker who fell in the punch bowl shouts out, she's not. We know that's Plutarch. Plutarch's helping her. And then we get Peeta's interview. She's not really listening to Peeta's interview until I'm coming back into focus when Caesar asks him if he has a girlfriend back home. Why is she all of a sudden paying attention to whether or not Peeta has a girlfriend back home? Because she wants to know. This is when Peeta's confession comes. Peeta has admitted his undying love for the other tribute from District 12. She says she presses her lips together and stares at the floor, hoping this will conceal the emotions starting to boil up inside of me. Katniss is so pissed. She believes that Peeta has made her look weak. This is when we get that line from Haymitch. You think he hurt you? That boy just gave you something you could never achieve on your own. He made you look desirable. And I think this is Collins' way, again, of pointing out the fact that rebellion is not made in just the symbol, right? It's not just the Mockingjay that brings down the Capitol. It's all the people that make her the Mockingjay. A movement is not just the leader. It's the people following that movement and aiding that movement. Peeta then says she's just worried about her boyfriend. My cheeks burn at the thought of Gale. I don't have a boyfriend. And Haymitch says, you're golden, sweetheart. You're going to have sponsors lined up around the block. He has done me a favor and I have answered him with injury. Will I never stop owing him? They end up watching the interviews back the night before the games, and she says, there I am, blushing and confused, made beautiful by Cinna's hands, desirable by Peeta's confession, tragic by circumstance, and by all accounts, unforgettable. Effie and Haymitch say goodbye to them. Effie says, thanks for being the best tributes I've ever had the privilege to sponsor, which is interesting because she did effectively sponsor Wyatt, Lulu, Haymitch, and Maisley. And then she says, I wouldn't be surprised if I finally get promoted to a decent district next year, which is so horrible. Haymitch reiterates what Wyrus had taught him, first avoid the slaughter, then find water. Katniss's nails are painted with flames, and she decides to leave them on for the games as a reminder of who she is to the audience. And she says that her room starts to feel like a prison cell, because it is. And she says if she doesn't get air soon, she's going to start throwing things again, because at one point in time, she had what I can only describe as an autistic meltdown, where she threw a bunch of plates around her room, and the Avox girl, I'll explain her later, helped her clean up. This is what leads Katniss to the roof of the tribute center where she finds Peeta, where he says, I want to die as myself. Does that make sense? I don't want them to change me in there, turn me into some kind of monster that I'm not. More proof that Dr. Gall and Snow, their idea that what happens inside of the games is primal and natural instead of their bullshit justification for oppression and murder, is not who people really are. Peeta knows that he won't be himself in there if he ends up killing somebody. He wants to show the Capitol that they don't own him, that he's more than just a piece in their games. And Katniss says, but you're not. And eventually she kind of gets pissed with him, and she thinks that his thinking is a piece of like a superiority complex. She's like, look, if you want to spend the last hours of your life planning some noble death in the arena, that's your choice. I want to spend mine in District 12. But she believes that she can win, and Peeta doesn't believe that he can win. He thinks there's no shot that he ends up in District 12, so this is the last thing that he can think about. Katniss does not treat Peeta very well throughout the majority of this book. This brings us to the games. Katniss is inside of the launch room. Cinna attaches her Mockingjay pin, her token, to her arena outfit. They are holding hands, and a wall comes down between them. Cinna says, chin up. head high. Collins, in this first book, chapters it in a really interesting way. Katniss will often lose like large periods of time. She'll nod off, she'll be napping, she'll fall asleep, or she'll be unconscious due to injury, and the chapters don't end there, right? We go from one paragraph to another, and maybe hours have passed. It's a really cool way to write the book and to immerse us into the games, right? It sort of illuminates time as a construct that doesn't apply in the arena. So Katniss actually thinks that she might go into the cornucopia and fight for the bow and arrow that's at the mouth of the cornucopia. It's Peeta that distracts her, and she loses her edge, so she ends up running away. She doesn't want to leave without any sort of spoils, though, so she risks running for a backpack, and actually Clove throws a knife at Katniss, and she catches it with the backpack. So she now has a weapon and a backpack that most notably contain a sleeping bag and a water bottle. She ends up moving through the forest, which is very familiar to her, and looking for water. While she's looking for water, this goes on for days. She looks for water for multiple days. She runs into a rabbit, which is very reminiscent of Haymitch running into a rabbit. Katniss is glad to see the rabbit because she's excited to eat it. Haymitch is glad to see the rabbit because he thinks of it as a friend. Katniss also, while she's walking, finds herself thinking of Peeta, and she's trying to explain it away, rationalize her feelings for him. She says, I tell myself again that if I get killed, his winning will benefit my mother and Prim the most. That is what I tell myself to explain the conflicting emotions that arise within me when I think of Peeta. And then, while Katniss is by herself, which she is for a good portion of the games, she has a hunter's mindset. She's becoming very acclimated to the arena and fully plans on killing people. She actually starts to get excited about the idea of killing people. She often thinks, let them find me, come get me. She actually builds fires that are ultimately a trap. They're big enough to draw the careers toward her because she wants to just shoot them and get this over with. She's fully prepared to fight and fully prepared to win, which is not what we've seen of Lucy Gray or Haymitch, because they sort of win incidentally. Eventually, the Gamemakers start to manipulate Katniss's game by throwing fireballs at her and lighting the woods that she was previously comfortable in on fire, so she loses her path from the stream, the only water that she's been able to find. She tries to loop back around, and that's when they start shooting fireballs at her, and they actually do get her, and she suffers pretty extreme burns. Haymitch ends up sending her burn cream that she's gotten from sponsors. She has this cool line that the people of the capital are made of money, and I think that that's intentional wording, particularly in the United States. Inside of capitalism, you are raised to understand that the person with the most money is the person with the most intrinsic value, which ultimately means that we value ourselves, we objectify ourselves as what we are made of money-wise. So the people of the capital are made of money and are obsessed with image. Thus, they have no substance. She says sometimes the Gamemakers do kill a tribute just to remind you that they can. We lose 3 newcomers to the stupid porcupine bear thing, but mostly they just try to manipulate tributes into coming face to face. So none of the games, all of the games are rigged. You have very little agency inside of the Hunger Games and inside of the country. So this fire has been used to manipulate Katniss into the path of the careers. Katniss previously learned, because the careers passed under her tree, that Peeta is working with the careers, and she's like, what the fuck? Peeta's working with the careers? And she literally thinks, okay, great, I can't wait to kill you. The careers chase Katniss up a tree, and Rue points out the Tracker Jacker nest to her. With the help of the burn cream, she is able to saw off the branch that the Tracker Jacker nest is on and drop the Tracker Jackers onto the careers, killing instantly Glimmer and a girl from 4. She gets stung 3 times, and the Tracker Jackers have an hallucinatory effect. They target the space in the brain that controls fear, so Katniss ends up reliving the worst days of her life, and she actually says, how many times do I watch Prim die? Because Glimmer has died, Glimmer is the tribute that had been carrying around the bow and arrow, so Katniss has to find a way to get the bow off of Glimmer's deformed body, and this is when Peeta runs back into the clearing that the Tracker Jackers were dropped, and she says that his whole body looks like he'd been dipped in dew, sparkling as if it had been dipped in dew. She ends up passed out in a bush for a few days, fighting through the effects of the Tracker Jackers and wondering what it means that it seems that Peeta had attempted to save her. She's wondering if she should discount this information because of the hallucinatory effects. And she wonders what Gale would think of the whole thing, but for some reason in her mind, Gale and Peeta just don't mix. She's recovering from the Tracker Jackers when she teams up with Rue. Rue has been following her and helped her with the Tracker Jackers. She would have been killed by the careers if Rue hadn't helped her with this. She says, you know, they're not the only ones that can form alliances. You want me for an ally? And she says, yeah, I do. Rue tentatively steps out into the open. I can fix your stings. Rue is trying to bring something to the table because she recognizes Katniss as a real competitor, and she doesn't think of herself as one. So she shows Katniss all of her supplies, and she says, I know it's not much, she says as if embarrassed, but I had to get away from the cornucopia fast. And Katniss says, no, you did just right. Katniss is very encouraging, and she starts to conflate Rue with Prim in her mind. The arena is really, really cold at night, and we learn that Rue has had no protection other than an extra pair of socks that she keeps on her hands. So Katniss says, you can share my sleeping bag if you want. We'll both easily fit. And her face lights up. I can tell this is more than she dared hope for. Katniss confides the faux nature of her relationship with Peeta to Rue. Again, a huge difference from the movie. And Rue says thoughtfully, oh, I didn't think it was an act. So Rue helps Katniss with her stings. She has medicinal knowledge that Katniss didn't previously have. The two have teamed up. They have shared food. Katniss decides to come up with a plan that isn't motivated by the need for flight or evasion, an offensive plan. She says, we're going to do something to the career. She gets a lot of information from Rue. Teaming up with Rue is extremely beneficial, extremely helpful to Katniss. Katniss learns that the careers have piled all of their supplies by the cornucopia. They don't have to hunt. They're not familiar with starvation, and they're not starving because they have been kept in supply by what was originally there. This is another way that the Hunger Games favors the stronger tributes or the more trained tributes. Katniss says, okay, I have a plan. Let's do something about it. She says, really? How? You can see the glint of excitement in her eyes. In this way, she's exactly the opposite of Prim, for whom adventures are an ordeal. Katniss says, burn it, dump it in the lake, soak it in fuel. I poke Rue in the belly, just like I would Prim. Eat it? She giggles. Katniss tells us that destroying things is much easier than making them. While the two of them work on their plan, she says, I come to know Rue, the oldest of 6 kids, fiercely protective of her siblings, who gives her rations to the younger ones, who forages in the meadows. Rue, when you ask her what she loves most in the world, replies, of all things, music. She opens her mouth and sings a little 4-note run in a sweet, clear voice. And the mockingjay spread it around the orchard. That's how everyone knows to knock off. It's just really brilliant writing, because not only do we fall in love with Rue, and not only is it horrific, all of these children are in this situation, but we know that Rue is 13 years old. And her explaining that when the mockingjay sings, everyone knows to knock off, is an echo of it's not over until the mockingjay sings. Everywhere inside the book, we get all this symbolism that when the mockingjay sings, we know that it will be over. And Katniss is going to sing. Katniss is the mockingjay. She says mockingjays are cool. They can be dangerous, though, if you get too near their nests. But you can't blame them for that. I unclasp the pin and hold it out to her. She says, no, the pin is why I decided to trust you. They decide to split up. Katniss is going to find a way to destroy the career's food supply, and Rue is leading them away from the food supply. She's distracting them by lighting fires throughout the woods to lead them farther and farther away. While Katniss is contemplating destroying the food, finds herself thinking again of Peeta and wondering if he really was trying to help her or if he's aligned with the careers. She's not sure what to make of the whole thing because he was sparkling, so she feels like she has to doubt everything that happened. She gets confirmation that Peeta is still alive, but badly wounded because Cato knows where he cut him. Katniss figures out that the tribute from District 3 has found a way to wire the explosives that are under the tribute pedestals in a sort of booby trap so that no one can steal the career's food. This is when she devises the plan to shoot the apple. The apples trigger the explosion, and the career's food supply is blown to bits. After she successfully engages the explosion, she loses hearing in one of her ears, and much like Haymitch, she doesn't have time to revel in her success for very long because her young ally is missing. Rue isn't at the meetup spot, so Katniss goes looking for her. After looking for a few hours, she hears a child scream, a young girl scream. There's no one in the arena capable of making that sound except Rue. She has just enough time to reach her hand through the mesh and say my name before the spear enters her body. Rue is shouting, Katniss, Katniss. Katniss gets there, and without thinking, she shoots an arrow at the boy from District 1 and it lands in his neck. While I shout at Rue, are there more? Are there more? She has to say no several times before I hear it. Rue has rolled to her side, her body curved in around the spear. Rue asks Katniss to please not go, and she says, of course not. I'm staying right here. Rue asks that Katniss sing, and she says, I'm not much of a singer, but if this is Rue's last request, I have to at least try. One of the lines in the song is, lay down your head and close your sleepy eyes, and when again they open, the sun will rise. I don't know if this book is so impactful because the writing's amazing, because it is, or if it's so impactful because at least the Hunger Games was honest about what they were doing. Katniss says, I can't stop looking at Rue, smaller than ever, a baby animal curled up in a nest of netting. She says it's the capital I hate, not the boy from District 1, for doing this to all of us. Gale's voice is in her head, his ravings against the Capitol no longer pointless, no longer to be ignored. None of this is dramatic. He says, for the first time I understand what Peeta meant about not just being a piece of their games. And I want to do something right here, right now, to shame them, to make them accountable, to show the Capitol that whatever they do or force us to do, there's a part of every tribute that they cannot own. She ends up covering Rue in flowers, so it looks like she could just be sleeping. She says, bye, Rue. As she's walking away, the Mockingjays sing Rue's song. The one that means she's safe. Good and safe. We don't have to worry about her now. Katniss is sent bread from District 11. What it must have cost the people of District 11 who can't even feed themselves. How many would have had to do without, to scrape up a coin, to put in the collection for this one loaf. It had been meant for Rue. Surely. She says, tomorrow I'll sort through the supplies. Tomorrow I'll make a new plan. But tonight all I can do is strap myself in and take tiny bites of bread. The things going on in the world right now are really bad and very overwhelming. And sometimes it's okay to lay down so that you can restore your strength. And we do have to keep going. It's our duty and our job to keep going. Find the energy to get back up. She says, I find myself wishing I could tell Peeta about the flowers I put on Rue. This is when the Hunger Games becomes even more nefarious, if that's fucking possible. Claudius Templesmith announces a rule change announcement. 2 tributes can win this year. If they're from the same district, both can live. Both of us can live. Before I can stop myself, I call out Peeta's name. It's just Peeta, it turns out, has never been a danger to her. He's very hard to predict, which might be interesting under different circumstances, but at the moment only provides an extra obstacle. Katniss now has to go look for a wounded Peeta. She does end up finding him. He has camouflaged himself into some rocks by the stream, and he says, you here to finish me off, sweetheart? And she's really impressed with his camouflage skills, and he says, yes, frosting, the final defense of dying. This is when we get into the development of Katniss and Peeta's relationship. Peeta proves to be quite humorous, even in his dying state. He tells her, remember, we're madly in love, so it's alright to kiss me anytime you feel like it. Katniss, inside of their relationship, initiates all the first kisses, which is really cool, awesome as it relates to consent, but is also that swapping of the gender norms again, right? Like, every other book I've read is about him kissing her versus her kissing him. She ends up attempting to nurse him back to health, which is something that she tells us she's really not good at all. Her mother and Prim are the healers inside of their family. Healers are born, not made. She asks him to take off his underwear, and she's not gonna look, and he's like, I don't care if you see me naked. And she's like, I care, all right? The idea of Peeta being naked in front of me makes me uncomfortable. Peeta tells her that she's really squeamish for such a lethal person. They end up moving into a cave. Peeta clearly has blood poisoning. He's got a fever that seems to be spiking and not breaking, and that's when Katniss starts to communicate with Haymitch. The two have found a way to communicate without anything verbal going on between the two of them. She learns that kissing him equals a pot of broth. She learns that confiding in him or sharing her feelings with him equals more gifts. Peeta hadn't received any sponsor gifts up until this point, so it's clear that Haymitch has chosen Katniss as who he believes will be the victor. That being said, there's only so much she can do with the herbs that she's aware of, given the infection that Peeta is fighting, and that's when Claudius Templesmith announces a feast of sorts. The only people left in the Hunger Games at this point are Cato and Clothe, the only other team. They're from District 2, a girl who is referred to as Foxface, she's from District 5, and Thresh from District 11, and then Peeta and Katniss. So there's only the 5 of them left. At one point in time, we get the story of Katniss purchasing Prim's goat. She tells Peeta that it was a Friday evening, the day before Prim's 10th birthday in late May. That implies that Prim is maybe a Gemini, just saying. She says she doesn't know the name of the guy that she bought the goat from. Everyone just calls him the Goat Man. Gale offered to carry the goat home. I think he wanted to see the look on Prim's face as much as I did. She was so excited. She started crying and laughing all at once. And Katniss becomes emotional when she's telling this story. She says she bought a pink ribbon to tie it on the goat. The goat was injured. That's why she was able to afford the goat at all. Prim and her mother nurse it back to health. And Peeta says that's really lovely. And she says, well, I knew that goat would be a little gold mine. And Peeta says, yes, of course. I was referring to that. Not the lasting joy you gave your sister you love so much you took her place in the reaping, says Peeta dryly. Peeta does not want Katniss to go to this feast. It effectively means her risking her life and ultimately his. Their fate is pretty much bound at this point. He's not going to survive without that medication. Nobody knows how much time he has left, but it's not much. And so Haymitch sends Katniss sleep syrup so that she can drug Peeta also a reversal, and go to the feast without his interference. He recognizes this only moments before he goes unconscious, and she regards as what she's done as unforgivable. This is an enormous betrayal between people that consider themselves to be teammates or partners. So Katniss goes to the feast. She's confronted by Clove at the feast in a scene that is also reminiscent to Haymitch's almost murder. It's Clove talking and gloating that results in Katniss being able to survive. Clove taunts Katniss about teaming up with Rue, and this is how Thresh learns that Katniss and Rue were allied. Just this one time I let you go. For the little girl. You and me. We're even then. And Thresh kills Clove, and Katniss is able to run and escape. She sustains an injury, though. Clove got her face. She cut her pretty badly. Katniss makes it back to the cave and ends up collapsing there, and she wakes up to Peeta stroking her head, and she feels good because it's Peeta. She says maybe he's mad about the drugging him thing, but in that moment he's all gentleness. Now that they're a team, Katniss and Peeta sometimes have to leave the cave to hunt. This is that example of Katniss being the hunter and Peeta being the gatherer. She's like, Peeta's not soft exactly. He's already proved that he's not a coward, but he is a town boy, right? He's afraid of the woods. It's inconceivable to him that he'd take his shoes off in the woods. He's very, very different than Gale. Katniss spends a little bit of time comparing the two in her mind. Peeta ends up kissing her, and she says, this is the first kiss where I actually feel stirring inside my chest, warm and curious. This is the first kiss that makes me want another. Since my father died and I stopped trusting my mother, no one else's arms have made me feel this safe. Peeta ends up confiding that his father had been in love with her mother. He said, see that little girl? I wanted to marry her mother, but she ran off with a coal miner. And Peeta says, why would she do such a thing? And his father said, because when he sings, even the birds stop to listen. This is what leads Katniss to understand that perhaps her own reluctance to sing, her own dismissal of music, might not have been that I really think it's a waste of time. It might be because it reminds me too much of my father. As Peeta is telling her all these things and confessing his love for her, she's like, for a moment I'm almost foolishly happy, and then confusion sweeps over me, because we're supposed to be making this stuff up, playing at being in love, not actually being in love. So if these details are true, could it all be true? They start contemplating the fact that they might actually win, and Peeta says, that'll be nice, tightening his arms around me. You, me, and Haymitch. Very cozy. Picnics, birthdays, long winter nights around the fire, retelling old Hunger Games tales, which is, what happens. And Katniss is like, Haymitch hates me. Only sometimes. When he's sober, I've never heard him say one negative thing about you. And Katniss is like, okay, well, I might actually do it. Return home, to fame, to wealth, to my own house in the Victor's Village. My mother and Prim would live there with me. No more fear of hunger. A new kind of freedom. But then what? Take away my need for survival, and I'm not really sure who I am. What my identity is. They leave the cave, and Peeta's very good about laying down his ego. He recognizes that he's scaring off Game. This is when Foxface eventually dies. Unbeknownst to Peeta, he's collected Nightlock, the poisonous berry. She eats them and is killed. There's a scene in the movie that implies that this might actually be intentional on her part, but we can't know for certain in the book whether or not she was aware. The Gamemakers force Cato and Peeta and Katniss, the only 3 tributes left, into a confrontation. Cato has been given a reflective body armor that means impenetrable by Katniss's arrows, but he is running to the cornucopia. They're all going to get back to the middle of the arena, and he is being chased by the mutations. The mutations are meant to reflect the extent of the Capitol's depravity, and the lengths that they're willing to go to hurt people. The mutts seem to have been implanted with the eyes of the dead tributes, and Katniss is thinking like, that can't be true, right? This must be an illusion. They want me to think that. But knowing what we know about Lulu and Dr. Gall, I don't know. They might actually be the eyes of the tribute. So they're being chased by these enormous dogs that can stand up on their hind legs and walk toward them. Literally terrifying. Cato ends up eaten by these mutts and Mercy killed by Katniss. And then it's just Katniss and Peeta left in the arena when Claudius Templesmith announces that actually the previous revision to the rules has been revoked. Now they're being forced to kill each other. Katniss feels like a total fool for having believed that 2 tributes would have been allowed to survive. She's like, of course, literally of course. And Peeta goes to take the knife off of his hip, and so Katniss loads her arrow before she even knows what she's doing, and he sets the knife on the ground, and she feels a pretty immense amount of shame. Peeta's like, come on, just shoot me. You are always going to win this thing. And she says, no, you shoot me and go home and live with it. And as I say it, I know death right here, right now, would be the easier of the 2. Katniss, he says, it's what I want. And she says, you're not leaving me alone in here, because if he dies, I'll never go home. Not really. I'll spend the rest of my life in this arena trying to think my way out, and that's what's happened to Haymitch and every other victor before. This is when she devises the plan that the two of them would rather die by poisonous berry together than move forward. She's not thinking this from the perspective of the star-crossed lovers, certainly not. What she's thinking is she wants to rebel against the Gamemakers, to have this ridiculous and horrible and malicious rule change blow up in their damn faces. So they're both gonna eat the poisonous berries and die at their own hands rather than kill each other. Right after they've put the poisonous berries in their mouth, they spit them out because Claudius Templesmith has said, stop, ladies and gentlemen, never mind, here are the victors of the Hunger Games, and Katniss and Peeta, much like Haymitch, have survived despite the fact that they were specifically told that they could not. They are brought onto a hovercraft, and Peeta's wounds are treated, and Katniss is offered a beverage. When she comes to, all of her scars and the damage done to her body in the arena are gone, including the scars that she accumulated over the years hunting. I think this is meant to reflect that she's ultimately something new. We as humans are transformed by every experience we have, but particularly by our traumatic ones. She feels that she is something different, remade by the Capitol, and we will dive into the implications of that in Catching Fire. For her interview, for her Victor viewing, she ends up dressed in an outfit that can only be described as girlish. There's padding on her breast. The dress has been cinched at the waist, and she's like, I understand this to be a calculated look, but I don't know why. And we come to find out from Haymitch that it's because she's in big trouble, that she now has to begin this performance to convince the people of the Capitol and the people of Panem that what she did with the berries was not rebellion or traitorous, but an act of love, an act of lunacy. Which is ridiculous, right? Like, particularly because we know the rebellion's been brewing for the last 24 years at least, but probably maybe more, probably for the last 74 years since the Dark Days. You know, for President Snow, sure, but for Haymitch to put this on her, that she's supposed to convince people that she's truly in love, just seems a lot and like super manipulative, and I don't like it. Katniss and Peeta are reunited on stage in front of cameras, and they make out in front of the cameras for 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Katniss actually finds out while they're on stage that Peeta has lost his leg. This is a story about a disability. Something that is completely neglected in the movies. Again, what the fuck? After the horrible parade that we're very, very glad Katniss does not have to go through by herself, everything that Haymitch has gone through and maybe more, suffering through parties, smiling through photos, being fed by the people of the Capitol, and being forced to watch a 3-hour rendition of all the gore and horror that has taken place for the last 3 hours, knowing what we know about trauma and re-traumatization, re-watching this immediately after exiting it is truly like the worst thing you can do as it relates to healing and PTSD. It's so terrible. But she does have Peeta with her, so they kind of hold on to each other the way that they have since they've been reaped. They're back on the train, and they're no longer hostages. Katniss starts to sort of morph or transform back into the version of her that existed in District 12. A version of her that didn't participate in the games, and she notes that now her relationship with Peeta feels feigned and foreign and confusing and wrong and bad. We as the reader maybe start to feel this way too when Katniss does. She says, the pressure of Peeta's armor on my shoulder feels so alien. When they're outside the train, Peeta stops to gather a bunch of wildflowers for me, and when he presents them, I work hard to look pleased. She thinks of Gale. The idea of seeing Gale in a matter of hours makes my stomach churn. But why? And this is when Haymitch kind of helps Katniss out, right? He breaks the news to Peeta. He's like, great job, you two. Keep up the good work. And Peeta's like, what is he talking about? And Katniss has to explain that they're in trouble for the berries. And Peeta's like, why was I left out of this conversation? And Katniss is like, well, because you're smart enough to just perform without being told what to say or do. He says, it was all for the games. Peeta says, how you acted. Not all of it, I say, tightly holding on to my flowers. He says, okay, well, what percentage of it was fake? And she says, I don't know. The closer we get to District 12, the more confused I get. And he says, well, let me know when you work it out. And the pain in his voice is palpable. They don't see each other again until they're pulling up to District 12. He gives Katniss a nod, his face expressionless. I want to tell him that he's not being fair. He's not. But he's a boy in love and brokenhearted. That we were strangers. That I did what it took to stay alive, to keep us both alive in the arena. And that's true, she did. That she can't explain things with Gale because she doesn't understand them herself. She wants to tell him that there's no point in being romantically interested in her anyway because she's never going to marry and never going to have children, and he'd just end up hating me later instead of sooner. which is so sad, gives us a lot of insight into the way that Katniss thinks of herself, that if I do have feelings for him, it doesn't matter because I'll never be able to afford the kind of love that these feelings lead to. Once they pull up to the District 12 platform, she sees Peter extend his hand. I look at him, unsure. One more time for the audience, he says, and we know it won't be the last time for the audience. His voice is hollow, which is worse. Already the boy with the bread is slipping away from me. This is the Capitol robbing Katniss of her choice in partner in Peeta. Even if she would have chosen Peeta, whatever that would have looked like, she knows that choosing him or loving him is the life now prescribed to her by the Capitol, designed to erase her bravery and courage. By the time she arrives in District 12, she cannot recognize herself or reconcile herself to the Katniss, the girl on fire, to the legitimate version of her that actually exists, the Katniss, the girl from District 12. She's attempting to contort herself back into the version of her that hasn't had to kill anybody and that has never kissed a boy, the version of herself that existed before the games. And that version doesn't even know Peeta, right? Except to feel uncomfortable with him because she feels she owes him for the bread. But as soon as Peeta has distanced himself, she misses him really immediately. And they're obviously trauma bonded. But we'll get into that next time. My name is Sage. Thanks so much for watching.